in Spartanburg County at Walnut Grove Plantation, and I'm talking to Gary Pender, who's a historical interpreter. Gary, tell me a little bit about Walnut Grove and why we've decided to maintain this beautiful house.
Well, first of all, it was settled and built about 1767 at the end of the French and Indian War, when this area was more or less taken from the Cherokees. Man started a farm here, ended up with a couple of thousand acres overall, mostly raised grain, livestock, which could be, of course, driven to Charleston for sale. And, of course, while living here, he still had to maintain his family. The closest store of any kind, if you want to call it a store, was an old 96, so they had to be pretty self-sufficient. And on the property, they have the usual blacksmith shop and their granaries and their smokehouse and all the things they would have needed to survive on the frontier, including the herbs which were necessary for survival. It wasn't a hobby, it was a necessity.
And that's something that you've done a lot of research on, and let's talk about it. You've got this divided into 4 areas, and let's start with the kitchen herbs.
Well, the kitchen herbs were mainly the very basics that everyone probably grows in their garden. You have rosemary, and you have fennel, dill, coriander, sage, all this, the normal things we would have. But in addition, we also have pot marigolds. And pot marigolds were named that because they were used in the pot. And it was actually not only a food source, but could be used as a seasoning source also. But yeah, everything
so that
is
lovely
very
little
practical.
flower that we think just repels insects actually was something that they would eat.
It was something they would eat. Not only that, Elizabethan poet writing about marigolds said, they will draw the bad humor from your mind, from your head, and improve your eyesight.
Well, I think I'll go home and eat some.
Exactly.
Even today, we love to grow things in the garden that when we rub against them give us a nice fragrance.
Yes.
I bet that was even more important in older times.
It's more important in older times. People were not really fond of bathing.
So you have a scent garden.
You have a scent garden. We have a scent garden. Or it's also called a strewing garden, where the ladies would take clippings from the different herbs and drop them on the floor, so when you stepped on them it released the scent, or they would put them in water and then sprinkle the water on the floor, which more or less had the same effect.
What are some of the plants that we find there?
In my scent herbs, I have sweet Annie, I have lemon balm, which is a favorite. I have old farm wife's mint, just merely for the scent of it. I have a new one called Georgia curry. I also have lavender. Most things that you would think about the older ladies having had, even in our time, they had then too.
And lavender used, of course, to refresh the clothes.
Refresh the clothes and put in your bedclothes, put in your pillow. Supposedly it helped you sleep better. Okay.
In those days, as you said, there wasn't a general store and there certainly wasn't a drugstore, so people had to use botanicals as their source for medicines. What things do we have in our medicinal?
Medicinal garden, I have tansy, I have hops, I have rue. Hops are really fascinating because they use them not only to brew beer with, but they also use them kind of like a sedative, because apparently half a cup of hops tea will put you to sleep. Then.
Tansy was a wonderful insect repellent.
It was an insect repellent, yes. And
they used that how?
Because this house stood for so long without any glass in the windows, I believe about 40 years, they would hang herbs, and particularly tansy, in the window, and it would discourage insects. And I never see an insect on tansy, so I'm sure that it does work. I have rue, which is another interesting herb, in particular because of its history. At one time it was called the herb of grace because they used it to sprinkle holy water on the altar before high mass. Of course, and then I have the things like catmint and some of the different medicinal mints. But these were necessary.
A vinca that has an interesting story.
A vinca, yes. Vinca majora was called joy of the morning or joy of the ground in the old Saxon herbals. They had wonderful names for things, and they liked plants. They were familiar with them. Along with that, it was also used for so many things. It was more than a social herb. It was almost a necessity.
Isn't that fascinating? we talked about the fact that this area was originally Native American
Yes.
property, of course,
Mhm.
and the Native Americans were intimately associated with all the plants that
Yes.
grew around them. And you said that the colonists took some of that knowledge. So
Yes.
what do we find in the Native American
in Native
section?
American herb garden, I have, of course, false indigo, which you use to dye cloth. It's called false because it didn't give as deep a blue as true indigo does. I have goldenrod, which was used for medicinal teas. I have sassafras. Sassafras was the first export from North America because it was believed at that time it was a preventative for bubonic plague.
Ooh.
I have some of their food plants. Carlberry would have been one of them. Just wonderful plants.
And of
yes.
course, one that's used today as a foundation plant, Yopon.
Yopon holly, yes. Yopon holly was used by Native Americans primarily in the southeast. They made a drink out of it called black drink, and it was used to purge themselves before any religious ceremony or any act of war. From what I understand, Amanda, it's a cup of black drink is equivalent to 20 cups of coffee.
Mercy.
That's-
And the scientific name is Ilex vomitoria.
Ilex vomitoria.
Gives
That
you an
gives you
idea.
a pretty clear idea. I've never had the nerve to try it yet. I haven't been that sick yet. Maybe one day I'll work up enough nerve to try it. Yes.
Well, Gary, I think it's fascinating that you wear the traditional garb that
That's
people would have
traditional
had.
garb. If the person had money, I'm afraid that the poor wouldn't have dressed anywhere near this well. And I can tell you this: it's warm clothing in August.
Gary, I commend you for the work that you've done to expand the experience for people who come here. And for other people who'd like to visit Walnut Grove, what's the best way to get information?
The best way to get information is to visit Spartanburg County Historical Association website and look for Walnut Grove page.
Well, we thank you so much for the time you spent with us today.
Thank you.